Welcome to the EA, everybody. As part of the evening lecture series, tonight we hear from Valle Medina and Ben Reynolds of Pa.LaC.E, although I never really understood if the pronunciation remains the same in spite of the spelling. As I do, most of you know Ben and Valle for being regulars at the AA. Indeed, Ben graduated here with honors and is part of AA's DIP 5, where he teaches alongside Cristina Diaz-Moreno and Efren Grinda. Valle, although less frequently, is often in the building, I guess, taking part in juries and discussions. She, on the other hand, graduated from the chair of computer-aided design, architectural design at ETH in Zurich, where she is currently a Geisendorf Fellow. Together, Ben and Valle are Pa.LaC.E, a group based in Basel that, as they claim, explores the spatial and temporal breadths of history and geography to conceive of environments and phenomena that are often cartographic, virtual, and built. Put in more simple terms, perhaps my terms, Pa.LaC.E is a collaboration in which architecture is made to exist as part of a broader field of knowledge forms and mediums, either of which are mobilized in the pursuit of Ben and Valle's voracious curiosity and desire to describe and reconfigure the reality surrounding them, to make sense of it. A quick glimpse at their work reveals an interest in subjects as varied as the history of ideas, modes of coexistence, interests in human behavior and in technology, amongst many others. Architectural projects, it seems to me, become occasions to explore such interests in spatial terms, rather than real or virtual spaces, however tenuous this distinction has become. In certain instances, architecture to Pa.LaC.E becomes a way of other speaking, a metaphor, analogy, or allegory of things external to it, or as they themselves would say, an amplified model of a certain reality. This other speaking, however, is not an occasion to retreat from the reality of building or buildings. All the contrary, their projects are pursued with astounding architectural and technological precision. The title of this evening's lecture is Pulverisation, and it will, I suppose, elaborate onto a project which has been recently published in the anonymously titled book, Paris Hermitage. Amongst other subjects, this project seems to me to explore the ways in which the production, transmission, and apprehension of knowledge are tied to deeper questions concerning the way in which we as beings conceive of ourselves and of our spaces, and how it is this very conceiving that constitutes a central moment in our intellectual existence. In its essence, I believe this project explores our agency to rethink of the way in which and the spaces in which we gather and discuss to learn. Given the moment in which the AA lies, this is a timely subject, and I hope the room will be receptive enough to make the best of it in receiving Ben and Valle's exposition of their work. I should also add that Ben and Valle themselves engage regularly with such questions as teachers at TU Vienne, where alongside Swiss visual raconteur Don Gross, they currently lead a design studio as visiting professors at the Department of Architecture, Theory, and Philosophy of Technics. This is but one of many other achievements of Pa.LaC.E. In 2017, they were residents at OMI International Center for the Arts, New York, and Andreas Zust Library near St. Gallen, Switzerland. In 2016, they participated in Villa Streulis, I guess, 10th anniversary residency in Winterthur, Switzerland, and at the Können Satio, this I'm sure is wrong, Foundation in Finland. In 2013 and 14, they were art fellows at the Van Eyck Academy in Maastricht. They recently won the 50th annual Shinkenchuku Central Glass Award in Tokyo, amongst other international prizes. Their work has been shown at the Center of Contemporary Culture of Barcelona, CCCB, the Boston Center for Arts in the US, Basis voor Actuele Kunst, BAK, the Netherlands, and the Architecture Foundation in London. They also published broadly in magazines including Volume, EP, EcoCore, ED, and Special Z. Their film Drawing Rights is currently on show at Van Abbe Museum Eindhoven. Their first major monograph, which I guess they will be telling us about today, Paris Hermitage, was released in early 2017 with Cooperative Editions New York, and I believe was presented here also last year, right? Taking no further time from their presentation, please join me in welcoming Pa.LaC.E.
Thank you very much for such a lovely introduction, and for everyone that actually made it today. Very happy to see familiar faces and new faces as well.
And a remarkable use of linguistics and the use of to be able to describe the different places we've been and also the different countries and their own characteristic phrases. So congratulations also.
Yeah, well accomplished. Yeah, well, today you will see, but we'll run through a set of different projects that we've been developing at our practice. Actually, we consider our works as conceits. And somehow this is a term that we borrow from the metaphysical poets. It's this idea that by comparing similarly very different type of images and things, you can actually compose poetry or poetical instances. Our works are comprised of numerous discrete mediums that access ideas. Rather than exchanging information with you today, that is to say, to tell you anything, maybe you can perceive certain positions, an order, a place, and at very least a will. We don't claim to reconcile any of these, but maybe somehow a little bit today with you. So relations within and around the mediums contribute to constructing a sense. And sense, etymologically, also means a direction. Although mediums too could come as a goal, or even as achievements that you would like to materialize, we consider them as idea surveys, stemming from our interest in larger acts of human endeavour. Encyclopaedic projects, expeditions, taxa, etc. We are, after all, detecting contours. And this is to say, we are trying to reinforce the naturalisation of our conceptual practice, forcing nature, which might seem as a contradiction, but in this sense, we're trying to constantly reclassify thoughts with actions.
So a lot of this work has come from a kind of understanding that we have today that in many domains, we and what we produce are understood as numerical abstractions. So embodiments of what many would try to think as anticipated behavior. So our work becomes a certain fetishization of the production of slang and imagery that taunts this context, that plays with it. In order to gain our own autonomy in our work, that actually we find the work easily does gain a level of autonomy. But it does come out of the fact that this widespread term towards what we would call a performativity of life and of the internet has led to the disintegration of things like just opinions and led to a certain middle-of-the-road orthodoxy. So this performativity of life hangs over societies, as we imagine, that in such a way that we now require certain truths, or we look for truths, converting things into truths, which you can see in things like reversion to things like traditionalism, nationalism, and indeed architecture of past stylistic forms. So this context, which is constantly feeding our work and constantly, I guess, preoccupying our own thinking, is what we term as noir. So noir in the sense that we know something is happening or something may be missing. It's perhaps undefined, but exactly what it is, we're not entirely sure. So the first project is an act at a solar collector, is probably the easiest way to term it, just outside Seville approximately 6 months ago. It was enacted at the PS10 solar collector, which replicates the sun 627 times. So these heliostats rotate, they track the sun, each are constituted by a 120 square meter parabolic mirror that points directly to a set of pipes which heats water and then drives a turbine to create electricity. So the question about this work was about what is the cost of an act, or can you measure an act? So we decided to find that out. The object itself is a large PVC sheet of plastic that melts at 260 degrees. We positioned it during the night to be ready for sunrise. This is a photo 15 minutes before sunrise. And around 54 minutes into the rising of the sun, the sheet reached 250 degrees. It began to melt. It fell to the ground. And on this sheet is a cutout of the building itself. So it was the image of the building reproduced as the sun passed through it as solar was collected, or solar energy was collected. So on the left is the average output of each heliostat during that time of the year. It's what they consider as a normal condition. And on the right is the resultant output as if it's marked across the output, or the output capacity of each heliostat. So in a sense, that image of the building is drawn on the power output of these heliostats. So you can see just around 9:30 or so a dip in the energy of production of this facility due to this kind of work. So the work we calculated cost 1.46 megawatts. But I guess what's more interesting as a byproduct of that was that this creative work or creative act coincides with the site of energy production. So therefore it's immoral, or it's wrong, or it's costly, maybe more so. So why should it be that if a work directly compromises something like energy at the source be any more immoral than a work created on another continent, in another place altogether?
So I will introduce another of these experiments. A forum for the missing is made from over 10,000 objects envisioned in European landscapes by participants from an online crowd-working platform. Crowd-working is the idea that we can produce something collaboratively with tens of thousands of remote individuals. Typically, the crowd workers are classed as virtual mechanical workers only. In this project, their job proposal entails the use of their subjectivity to capacitate the creation of the forum itself. So individuals located around the globe were invited to analyze one stock image each of a sky over Europe and describe and characterize which shapes they see in the clouds, to invite pareidolia. That is to say, the tendency to perceive an image in an ambiguous visual pattern, actually. The creation of objects, part stemming from the image of a cloud and part from the shape they see in the cloud, is the actual outcome. This is, for example, a horse. The entire forum is constituted by the individual inputs of the workers. The work is planned something akin to variations of the idea of a riverbed without a river. Computational scientists actually quite often battle with this pareidolia, as is one of the pitfalls of computer vision algorithms. Since, for example, they might tend to see faces when they should be, for example, window panes. In the forum, we're producing somehow the work that a computer is unaware or incapable of doing. Yes, objectively, they are clouds. They are even striated, cumulonimbus, to follow some scientific definitions. But as we know, there are also horses, or whatever the eyes might see. This, for example, this is the kind of a stock image that is handed to one of the crowd workers. It's a generic European landscape. In this case, the individual saw a horse in the shape of a cloud. A 3D image of that cloud was used to produce a high field, which provides a kind of boundary to be interpolated along with a 3D model of a horse itself. Yeah, so that's the interpolation of both. This was digitally morphed using custom software and to produce the final new unrecognizable formation. The result is somehow the production of a massive survey of 10,000 plus human envisioned objects.
So at another somewhat reduced or precise scale and no less customized, a manufacturing assembly line is the space of sitting in this forum or transiting, be that as it is. So there is a painted and backlit conveyor belt on which people are sitting and interacting, synonymous with automated work. So every piece has an inscription of it from this translation process from what was seen in the cloud and then marked digitally. It says also the number of the worker that participated in this. So it's a kind of pile. And the material itself is ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene, which in the 1960s was developed as a plastic for orthopedic and spine implants specifically. So one of the initial processes was to interview a bunch of crowd workers, in this case, Finnish. I'm not sure why the sound is working on that. So for the forum requires individuals to consolidate itself in some ways. The disposition of objects and the way that they're arranged signifies things like a center or where the speaker should go. There is a kind of expose on the idea of implicit work where, for example, online, we're often working without even knowing that we are working. Either by feeding a deep learning algorithm or simply generating lucrative high-resolution demographic data. So it's a forum to address this growing skepticism about the legitimacy of human work through complicit crowd collaboration, that is to say, work I realize I am doing. Conscious knowledge that you're contributing to something on a scale that's never been seen before.
Something that you will see through the talk is that we're going to introduce smaller projects like interludes. So this one is the interlude blue. They all are related somehow to the formation of mediums for projects, actually. And this one that I will introduce you by enumeration is composed of different type of pieces or inserts, cutouts from travels and projects. Some locations actually coincide with the travels of the architect Joran Utzon, since the work was actually exhibited in his house in Spain, in the island of Mallorca. Some locations are, for example, Hollywood at night, the Saudi Arabian cliffs, or a Chinese farm in Yunnan. And this is a time that he spent as a young man trying to find himself through these sort of realizations. This is the disposition of different objects produced, and they are in relation to the house itself and the cliff. These are 3 towers made with bitumen, and actually they are borrowing from the proportion of his works in the Arabian desert. Inscription 1 is the title of this piece, relates to a sign, and is describing details and dimensions of the plan of a living quarter for one person in a baseball pitch in Santa Barbara, California. You might recognize this work later on, as it's also constituting a larger investigation on project. Yeah. This piece is the reconstruction of the mirror font in Elizabeth Wolf's bedroom. She was an interesting lady. She was a textile manufacturer who commissioned Miss van der Rohe Wolf House in Guben in Poland. The mirror was commissioned but with an unusual queer, which is actually to have a slight bent curvature on it. During the wandering in the house, we found a note, and the note we finally discovered was written by the housekeeper, and it was written in Catalan. This translates roughly to just a soft brush and enjoy the breeze. This was the very same message that we used to encast and to produce an inscription in Mallorcan glazed ceramic. Something else that we hosted was the creation of a geodesic rectangle, and this is a piece that comes from an empty spheroid. So conceptually, we took the geometrical formation equally in length to the draft of a boat, and it's actually a boat that is nowadays disassembled. A Japanese-made petroleum tanker, which was nicely named Sea-Wise Giant. And finally, so another piece is a hearth, and it is displayed in the beautiful cliff. This takes us back to the prototypical place in antiquity for spending time together, coming together.
So, as was alluded to before, I'm not sure what. Oh, okay. This is the project which culminated in the publication of this book, which I've been told is also on sale tonight. But it began. This was the first, I guess, sketch or the first intuition to produce or rather to perform the carving process of this stone, which we found in a quarry in Maastricht in southern Holland. But really it became a kind of crucial moment in the turn of our office to engage with alternate materiality vis-a-vis outside the computer, a kind of conscious decision to do so. Since we're all operating as architects, often in 3D packages, extruding, lofting, sweeping, these kinds of phrases we're all familiar with. But this was a process of first the excavation, carving, and fundamentally a sort of manualization of the work that we do. And in some cases quite tough. So it was also about elaborating thinking across time too, since you have another engagement with material. The numbers on the left refer to the live transmission of the stone in 3D space. But for us, this material, if you like, this transmission of data is no less descriptive or no less interesting, at least for the practice. So things like the fact that it has this embedded interference as numbers change and as the numbers grab this information is a sort of substance of sorts, which then somehow naturally led us to produce an application which maybe is a one-liner, but the idea that the stone could be distributed through others and recreated, on the other side of wherever you are. So somehow that materiality allowed the stone to become mobile and become distributed and become centered less in some sense. So yeah, as was mentioned, it formed into this book, which is also a 3D model. And of course, you know, of course, led to a building, and how to spatialize some of these questions and how to formalize them in the sense of what kind of programs or what kind of typologies may we be referencing in the build-up to this sort of work. And it concerns the site of St. Victor Abbey in Paris, just by the Seine. The abbey was formed by a group of rebels from the Notre Dame area. Their original intention was to make an alternative circle for prayer and for worship and contemplation, no longer about praying and mourning, but rather praying and teaching, praying and learning and sharing. So this is the site of the abbey across time. It became at one point a textile manufacturing plant, a lumber yard. It became the city's wine hall. And today it's the USU University campus. And for those that know important architectural competitions in the late 80s, knows the importance of this site. But for us, I guess the most important figure, rather, not the site necessarily, but the figure of this person, Hugh, the great mystical writer of the 12th century, philosopher, theologian. And it was at this abbey where he worked on this great project called the Mystic Ark. And the Ark, as you see it here on the right, is an educational tool. In it, he tried to contain everything. He tried to contain the cosmos, a mappa mundi, the zodiac sign, the Roman calendar, systems of periodization, weather related to geography, and so on. Basically, it was meant to rid the population of confusion, since confusion was the mother of ignorance. And in a way, for us, this this personal endeavour to transcribe everything one would know, or not necessarily know, but wish to know onto a single document, our first immediate interpretation was somehow this idea of a human document that's shared, and I guess we're all making and creating the internet as a sort of human manifested document of sorts, which it purports to contain everything we know.
Yeah. So from really early on, we were interested in this idea of collecting spaces of educational spaces throughout the years. Especially two key spaces were the Sorbonne, that you see here on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, the monastery in St. Gallen. So namely, we managed to collect about 1,200 plants, and they serve as a basis of these new spatial formations that will emerge within the proposed Hermitage. On the same site, now we propose a space to know yourself by knowing all. Omnia dicere is the Latin word for knowing everything. The Paris Hermitage is a place for elective counteraction to the reshaping of living practices by the extreme conceptual abstractions made possible by the raw power of technology. Those that come from the city to the Hermitage, they come to reconfigure their pulverized patterns of life. So you see here in this diagram how a person might reconfigure their times of wakefulness, work, and sleep through the spending of 39 weeks within the building.
At quae semper virgo
is the ground floor. Extreme seclusion actually appears within and around the Grand Court, which is the main space in the building. The Grand Court contains the Judean desert, or partially. This is the time and the place of the birth of Cenobitic monasticism, and Cenoptic comes from the Greeks, and actually means common and life. Some of the spaces slowly you will identify in the plan are, for example, a library that contains quality structured information, an amphitheater where collective discussion and it's actually the primary interface of the building. There is a parlor, which is the discussion annex for singular contributors, and a refectory for communal eating, etc., including living quarters which are for spending on your own the nights. Yeah. So, and this is equally this is the first floor. You can see other spaces, like the classroom for the mutual verification of the knowledge and the will of the contributors. There is a clinic for the monitoring of the mind, a simulator that closes the gap between the virtual and the biological models of reality, in other words, a supercomputer, and a herbarium. Of course, as we went through elaboration in these projects, many different anchors were discovered. One of these anchors was the Curaçao synagogue in the Caribbean. Here the sun is implemented in the space as a way to disguise noise when people were using this institution at the time to enter in silence. It was also through this process of compilation of spaces that the style in the building started to dissolve in the project, a realization similar to that of Henri Matisse when conducting his early studies on permutations on a pedestal. And he went from a very figurative work to a more abstract piece. At the Hermitage, these thousands of sources led to a kind of every style and with no classification. That is what we consider the capturing and freezing of vectors. We're not talking about dust that is lifeless. However, we call it pulverization, which is a phenomena belonging to the domain of the microscopic, the infinitesimal. This is the extreme fragmentation of matter.
So the semidomes, for example, of the Sorbonne Amphitheatre were partially indexed, its naves and its annexes. This is the auditorium of the Hermitage. And also the Dome of the Rock and its lattice, but more as a way to frame a geological entity within a building. This is the limit of the desert, the central court of the Hermitage. So the Hermitage itself is made of pulverized quartz crystals, the idea that every single possible architectural style could be existing within this form. The quartz, the second most abundant material on Earth, is crushed and fused at a high temperature. Quartz was considered by the ancient Greeks as frozen water, and it was thought also as a source of solar energy. On the left, you can see the Nimrod lens, which is 3,000 years old, which was made to concentrate sunlight. And on the right is synthetic quartz grown in a hydrothermal process in a lab. But the same synthetic quartz sits inside every single personal computer. It sits inside everybody's phone, all the tablets, all the servers. And it's the thing which is the clock. It's the thing which regulates time. So depending on the precise angle to the crystallographic axes, how it's cut defines the operating frequency of a computer. A slice of quartz acts as a clock that sends signals, ones and zeros, to the CPU. Depending on that cut, the computer can be faster or slower. So the Hermitage is able to register behavior. The pulverized quartz is endlessly revisable since it's fused and melted, and it yields the insignia of time. So the construction and the refinement of the Hermitage is then able to break from the myth of the city, from past foundations. It becomes somehow autonomous.
On site, the architecture is considering as something that is emerging and somehow becomes a nature itself. You can even go down to the components and the structure, how it comes together. This is for example, the amphitheater in Sorbonne in Paris, where in this painting, every discipline from geology, chemistry, etc., is impersonified and in a way also blended. So this led to us to think of the possibility of reconstructing or articulating the horizon inside the desert itself. At the central court of the Hermitage, also the solar condition is a technical disposition. I could, in fact, read from the book a little bit of its description. It's quite technical, but nevertheless. In the roof structure of the Grand Court, there are many continuous output xenon short arc lamps suspended on tracks that correspond to the sun path at the Judean desert. Like this, the roof structure produces full spectrum light, equal to that of sunlight. In order to replicate the light specific to the desert, the intensity of the lamps is adjusted with respect to the local elevation of the sun to the earth, the absorption and scattering of light as it passes through the atmosphere, the changing angle of the sun according to time of the day, and the annual solar activity from the year 483 AD, which is where Cenobitic monasticism started, and then extrapolated from ultraviolet UV irradiance data from 1610 to present. All in all, the contributors that access the Grand Court access it alone. After knowing the Hermitage collectively through discussion, the Grand Court acts as a place for manufacturing the Hermitage within themselves. The Hermitage is the first abbey formed as a support for spiritual struggle, for restless human hearts, and distinct from other spaces in terms of its condition and character. So this is a drawing of this interior desert. And these are these rooftop layers that I was describing as well through the text. One, from top to bottom, it's a 30 meters diameter of polymer impregnated textile. Below is a UV light array, and just below the collimating resin lenses that refracted the light in order to get the accurate sun angle. Yeah. These are other plans. Yeah. And below is a supercomputer, which is seen as the production of conditions. We see these conditions as quite vital in the sense that the very same way we inhabit together a hammam or a public bath, this extreme condition of different temperature, it's something to be cherished. Yeah. In commune. Yeah, this is the same supercomputer in relation to this ceiling construction. And these are just interior images. This is the auditorium where this collective discussion happens, and is the primary interface with the public as well. There's a refectorium, yeah. Sleeping quarters.
This is the library of the Hermitage with one book. It's the connection to the desert. Section running north-south. The acts in these images here concern one participant's relation to the daily rhythm of the building and its material. So the building, in a sense, ends the way that we started, by measuring an act with a material. So from carving to agglomeration. And our bodily limbs are the measuring tools in both operations. The building acts along as a large temporal oscillator, recording time and commonalities in material. So contributors are ideally renewed as intellectual subjects by coming to the Hermitage, by asking, what do we think of ourselves, what is our space, and what can we be?
So another interlude white. This following experiment it was taking place inside a basement, and it was investigating the use of the salt alkali, which is, alkali comes from the Arabic word meaning ashes or salt wort. And this was actually discovered by Gerber, Iranian polymath from the 9th century. The combination of alkali and what we know today as tallow or animal fat is how bodies have been cleansed since that time until now. So he was basically who popularized the use of alkali for cleaning. Yeah. The preparation of the ground is always needed when you are about to begin a construction. And equally, our first requirement for producing this work was to create a condition of a lab-like space. So we diminished the temperature to minus 10 degrees. This was achieved by using a fan and a pool of water, as it is a typical Middle Eastern technique that they use to freshen up living rooms in really hot summers. This was the first impression that resonated actually with those coming to visit the basement. Was the way also to engage with the work later, like entering a fridge. This was the very surroundings of the mosque in Kufa, where the alchemist Gerber used to frequent for daily prayer. And this is the salt wort that I was mentioning. When you burn this plant, you are able to produce this alkali substance that we were interested in using by the combination of different ingredients. Through the separation of these elements or ingredients, we had different also reactions to the alkali that led to different works or formations as a series.
So through the reaction with the alkali and different substances kind of in relation, different formations, different geometries were related, and all coming from the ideas and, in a way, in this case, the shapes of Gerber's vessels where he first conducted these alkaline experiments. So these are simply casts combining alkaline and fat. And so, in this case, the materials were passed through a process of formation by a centrifugal force generated by a belt motor as it was setting. And the final separation using, for example, this case, sugar with alkaline was done to achieve crystalline laminas. These laminas were formed with rainwater from Al Kufa, collected over 4 years. And so this particular work is a model of the mosque at 1 to 100. This was made from 40 kilograms of fat and alkali. And every 4 days, mist for 1 minute, which is roughly 60 millimeters of rainfall, which is the annual rainfall of Kufa, is sprayed on it until it finally disappears. So the following project, Civic Canyon, concerns a 30-something cultural worker from Santa Barbara, California. So this particular person, through a series of long conversations, according to him, found that the city had removed any meaningful bodily interaction or bodily, let's say, sensibilities, that he no longer really had a relationship with Santa Barbara. So it was kind of an interesting brief from the outset, and in the development of several long conversations, as I said, we mutually established that while this individual enjoyed life on the fringes of Los Angeles, it was also the same culture which made it difficult to be there. And after, again, getting to a certain point, mutual consensus, this individual felt that it was a certain widespread understanding of the idealization of a body, let's say, or a figure, or of a look within Los Angeles, which was the thing which made him not feel welcome in some way, if you follow. So this struck us, this idea that the culture could pervade a certain physiognomy, a way of looking. And then we, of course, were interested to look deeper into that and look at, for example, at least in Hollywood's earlier history, what you would call the big 6 major movie studios, one being Paramount. So the first thing we did was to collect and measure this kind of physiognomy of leading actors that were christened by these studios to establish physiognomical norms. So we used the mining process to find that or detect that, or at least to create a large survey of that. Not just in terms of quantity, of course, but to find a characteristic, to find a material or find a form. And this is the site of in the Honda Valley, just outside downtown LA. It's roughly 1.5 hours from Burbank, which some still consider the epicenter of contemporary Western film production. And what resulted was a single living studio.
This is also a fragment of dimpled steel, and it's braced with ropes, and yeah, it's part of the structure of it. There is this old idea of the ancient coastal dwellers that the entire earth was nothing more than an island in a sea. Since after trying and trying in vain to reach other lands, the coastal dwellers thought that their land was at the limit of the earth. The medium that was responsible for the earth's floating, of course, received considerable speculation. This was not simply the water of the river. Instead, it was like the material found directly under the firmament or lower heaven, crystalline, congealed, especially combined to resist the flame of the sun, moon, and galaxy of stars, to be itself full of fire and yet not to be burned. It was an elusive kind of material, water, but not really water, air, but not really air, fire, but not really fire. At the center of the studio, we see the image of this proverbial hearth as a place of the fire. with a light so bright that is capable of heating the pool via the underfloor air-fired heating coil. The entire floor becomes a floating hearth, like that of the Farnsworth house. Since the interior and the exterior are connected via the pool, it acts as the global temperature regulator. So its form is constituted by many of these standard issue faces or chins that are exported by the Big Six movie studios. It is for now located near the Santa Barbara High School baseball team home field, the Tritons. Around it there is a pool with a material so concentrated with salt that only extremophiles can grow. This is the new stylized Tritons logo as well. From the idea that one can have a sense of belonging to a place within the forms of chins of leading actors, the floor of the Civic Canyon is stitched together by the construction of 6 posture or grammars, and they are from all over the world. A reclining position adapts postures in the way that ancient Greeks, the clini, used as a condition for sitting. Clini were used in symposia or convivia. Often, 3 clini were arranged in a U shape, where dinner guests were reclined, and then during a meal in almost like lion position.
So, in a kind of objective method of tracing these worldly postures and casting them into the floor, led to the floating hearth, this floating fire. This is a painting of Triton and Nereida by Arnold Böcklin. So, in a sense, as a way to break from the site in which this building exists, Civic Canyon, the client's body is never really at rest, since there are all these grammars of posture carved within this plate. This is the floor plate and the pool. So technically, or maybe not so technically, it's never really in Santa Barbara. It's a culturally imbued floor plate. It's a culturally imbued body that's neutralized through transfers of worldly postures, so it exists everywhere beyond actually where it is. So, as with the interlude so far, this also helps to describe development in some other work that may relate to previous work seen already and other works also yet to come. Again, it's trying to construct some kind of sense through discrete objects and then discovering how they then relate to broader projects at large. And you might recognize some other objects previously. So this is a new plant for the company 3M. This is a hardened piece of salt coming from Civic Canyon, the previous project from its concentrated pool. A study for a low wall. And a scaleless recreation of a stone typically used for exercising through lifting, traditionally used in ancient Japan. But it serves as a study for a building footing. And to link Civic Canyon through the Farnsworth house, that uses a system of hot water pipes installed within the concrete floor. Due to the fluctuations of the site in the Farnsworth house, we managed to gather some moisture or some excrement of the building as it was exposed and heating. That would be the Farnsworth underfloor heating.
And the following project is one of 2 buildings proposals in Jiangsu, which is in the province of China. The project is located amongst a network of islands, water streams and bridges, and it's at a flower farm. The project foundation resembles the earthy islands present in the meadows already. There are pseudo-natural composites or ramped earth mounds. The project is a continuation of techniques and forms in China as achieved from literal interpretations of its local ancestral legacies. It is configured primarily as a support of in general, impermanent phenomena such as light, speech, color. The building is designed to fully absorb sunshine and color from the surrounding nature, and it acts as its projected ornament. It is an instrument, a catalyst for color before it's even meant for inhabitation. The materials are equally the field's color or the earth islands accessed from any point. Also, the flex of the roof is calculated to redirect the sunlight deep inside its interior, and the color is kept thanks to the neutral emanel substance that is coating the spaces.
So 3 activities are permanent and 2 are mobile, and that's discoverable in the plan. One activity is food preparation, the other activity is discussion and eating. Food preparation takes place in a central position and balances the rest of this island, but a logic of wandering walls and long benches line the edge of the proposal. And as Baye mentioned, the base is made from rammed earth, which is an element of Chinese construction used for millennia for preparing ground, walls, altars, and foundation. But secondly, the walls themselves are made by bending large steel plates, and the beams are connected and welded to that and are made by CNC. So these main structural elements are namely the walls which support the hidden beams. I think this is the long and the short section. Okay.
And lastly, nuances and details in a shallow creek is the following very short clip that we'll show. We'd like to conclude with this small piece, and it's something that is still information belonging to a larger project. In this book, in this piece, the book is considered as a living entity and as an elaboration of techniques born and extracted from nature itself. So it's knowledge at large. The book is extracted from a personal library of a collector outside St. Gallen. And the knowledge that once was nature, we found that is inscribed in the form of a book and almost becomes bacterial once it's belonging to the library at large. We question ourselves through this exercise about other ways of consolidating and engaging with content. Can there be forms of post-consumption? Can the journey of a book reflect preciousness, impermanence, and the uncanny?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions and comments? Very welcome.
I guess I'll start with a question.
Sure.
Thanking you again for this fantastic presentation. In discussing the project Paris Hermitage, at some point you made you were referencing time as an important component of the project. And then you mentioned that contributors would reside in the building for a period of 39 weeks, which of course is the time of a pregnancy, which is something unmentioned in the book and in your presentation, but something I guess you alluded to. So I'm interested in this how do you say, this correspondence or this relation between pregnancy and residency. So the residency as a place where things are born. And I was wondering how much of this, given that many of your works and projects are produced in residency, has to do with the way in which you have ended up working with this very weird, let's say, practice, which is the practice of the residency, which interestingly also, usually in my experience at least, works with multiples of 3 months, 3, 6, 9 months.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever contemplated the question, or at least the idea of that as a fixture of time, so that measurement of time in relation to the place or the moment in which we think and make ideas, let's say. Nevertheless, I think there's a large component about that project which maybe in a futile sense tries to deal with this notion of escaping the city, and therefore, what level of time might be relevant. And you're right, it's this time of maybe albeit futile, being reborn in some sense, or a length of time long enough that you could recollect your thoughts and become another person, if that's why you might go to this Hermitage. So for us it was never, and in hindsight, perhaps there's some truth to this process of kind of, in the way that we work, which is maybe to be wholeheartedly engaged, even in an environment like this, and then to remove yourself and think again, and then come about, I think that perhaps it's also a kind of contemporary condition if you call yourself an urban citizen. Where do you find those kinds of places? So, we had a kind of discussion today about, how do we talk about this Hermitage? What does it really mean? And I think we're a little divided about that. But for me, it's also a kind of mental space. It's a space it's an intellectual project in the sense that it's just asking you to think about your relation to a context. That's all. But then it gets interesting when you have to say typology, time, material, where do they all come from? Where's the source of those thoughts? And
Yeah, it's actually I never really made the connection to what you mentioned. However, it's true that somehow, intentionally or not, this biological relation to time is somehow a feature of how the building is described, or the way it is conceived. And for you, perhaps you were mentioning maybe it's about this space for the mind, but at the end of the day, it's also a rupture within the city, this continuation. That's why it's possibly hard to define. Also has embedded all these different symbologies and different times that are not the common times.
It's also a lot about deep time, in the sense that, that this desert itself, the foundation of Cenobitic monasticism, is a time that can be recorded, it can be extracted, but it's a long way back.
It's interesting, when you start to look at figures, because then it's not only the mythology of how you describe the building, but these hidden, almost like anchors or formulaic elements to it, where you can even read further through symbolism or biology.
Other questions?
I'd like to ask a little bit about this very strange category of materials that you propose. I know because it's somewhere between this absolute concrete, physical, alternative material, as you call it, and somewhere between on a lot of the project is this absolute immaterial quality about it. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because I agree that we tend to go to either way of this spectrum, both sides of both extremes. I think also it's really interesting for us not only the play of matter, but also how can architecture or space be like almost like an instrument as to appreciate nature or matter. So as almost like a tool for abstraction of this complex realm that is reality. However, we do find really interesting as a way to engage with a different grain of the narrative, the matter itself. So it's two interests, I think, at play.
Yeah, and I guess what also kind of preoccupies us is the interrelationship between nature and the digital, but almost in this kind of the heroic attempt of the computer to kind of get as complex or get as romantic as what nature can be by itself. So this almost interplay, but also constant failure of trying to get both of them to cross over. Also, today also, I guess this is one moment in time, but it also allows you to achieve a certain resolution in work that previously you weren't able to kind of think about, or just by computation, things like that. And we think we're blinded, but we think we're getting closer to nature. And we're trying to predict it, actually. And simulate it. But nevertheless, I think what you mentioned is interesting, that the resultant matter that comes out of that is curious, and I think it needs to be defined, and at least in our work, what is that in relation to space, or how can that frame another life in some shape or form? So they're just kind of urgent questions. They're natural ones. It's not that we set them up to sort of like a predefined set of briefs, let's say, but rather curiosities about, what are those relations like, or how can we test them, and things like that.
And also, I guess many of us, this idea of being engaged with the material, it's something that we really feel that it's the time for that. So we spend a long time, of course, within the realm of things that you can't touch. So it's almost like taking the richness of what's in your hand and be able to translate it to other means. And actually, we don't differentiate between something happening here or a material and what's simulated on a computer. So you can really translate and interchange understandings.
I listening to you now, and of course knowing a little bit of your work that you did in Vienna as well, I get a strong flavor of locations and imagery and materiality as well, almost of haptics. But you mentioned, I think very early on, if I'm not mistaken, the word poetry. And I wonder how you relate your work to language, or because I'm a writer, as you know. And as a writer, I wonder how you relate to language in your work, and also where you see language in the culture that we are beginning to formulate.
Well, I guess, there's a tendency to think that language has the form of words too, that it's a textual thing. But it's incredible, in a sense, for us, the ease through the making of something, or the association of language with the thing itself, which completely is already on a complexity or a level that it's difficult to get the text to alone, let's say, or for that matter, the material itself, just to say. So, I mean, for maybe it's easy to detect, maybe it's not, but this contradictory nature of what is being said about the object and what the object actually is, there's a huge amount of power in that, and I think that for us is very inspiring. I guess it's that kind of moment of conceiving of those relations that you just discover them as you make or as you write and so on. So
yeah, it's interesting because in many ways at the genesis of our thinking or the beginnings of projects, they're in the same level, you know, materials, words as thoughts, drawing. Yeah, so in a way they become really substantial part of imagination as well. So in that sense, we don't want to devoid works from that layer of richness. And we don't want anyhow to overcome a project to somehow kill the project through metaphor as well. So it's finding this sort of very thin line of articulation between expanding its meaning or its connotation with its actual spatiality.
Yeah, and I guess it's difficult to say when something works or when it doesn't, you know, like to say if there's a good metaphor or a bad one, or what association of what meaning with that material. It's, you know, there's really only one maybe. So it's kind of a process of elimination or just conversation, at least through for us.
Yeah, and also words become part of the realm of the pulverized nature. So it's not only the matter, but it's also the discourse and
and
like
there's some.
bits.
I think that I guess that the reason for the title of the lecture is that pulverization, as we kind of think about it, is this, you know, this matter which is being crushed beyond almost interpretation. But it's also it is also for us at least a kind of neutral territory. It doesn't feel like it's problematic. Actually, it's rather something to be discovered and to be defined. And I mean, when you say the word pulverization, at least for us, it's a social context. It's a formal context. It's a lot to do with labor. It's a lot to do with things that we've been kind of always talking about.
And
so,
historical in a weird way as well.
historical.
Historical. Yeah, historical. So in the sense that everything is embedded. The idea that events happen in time. We live through now. There is a certain sense of time. However, anchoring in history only as a motive of truth, a thought or a work, it's something that we don't consider maybe that it's so instrumental for our work at least. So we like them to float and to fly as much as words do and ideas do.
I have a question too about format. I think we see an incredible wealth in tonight's projects. And oftentimes even multiple formats within the different projects. It being a book, as you present, or a 3D model of a book, or a photo scan of a book, or an act, or a video documentation of an act, or even very kind of orthographic line drawings of plans and sections. It's a really not only the wealth, but also the multiplicity for us as an audience to receive those projects. So I guess it's if I can make you elaborate a little bit on how you wish, or how you see this potential of, I mean, even the images on images in the presentation behind you. I think speaks of a sort of an interest in this kind of multiplicity.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I don't know also if you mean that we have, if we expect people listening and watching to really understand what we're talking about. I don't know. It's in many ways, we don't want to be dogmatic or to teach a story or to lead you through a certain interpretation of an idea. In that sense, we are not that, at least I am not that worried about how you interpreted what we show.
And the first thing we said was that, you know, we don't claim to really say all that much, but rather the sense of the work could be clearer. And it's just, and you mentioned that the etymology of the word sense is direction, kind of movement. So, but we kind of have something we always try to stay, I guess, true to, is that the medium should be the most natural to the investigation, that you shouldn't kind of force a medium. And we've all been educated a certain way, and which puts you in a certain category and makes you think a certain way as well. So I guess there was this process of kind of, rewriting a little bit these formalisms of how to express in order then to make something just kind of relevant and natural. And that was a kind of longer process, I would say. Just to realize also that question, took time. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so I think this is a good way to close the discussion, and we could all go to the neighboring room where there will be books and drinks.
Okay.
Not all for free.
No particular
Thank you,
order.
Ben and Valle. Thank you.